What's up, class? This is Mr. Matthews, and this week we're doing something a little bit different. I'm going to make a video instead of making you read an entire lecture. So, this week we're going to talk about story, and specifically, we're going to talk about the role that story plays in our lives, and even the poem that we are using to view story as the lens through which we view story is about a story. It's Robert Penn Warren's his poem called "Tell Me a Story," and it's not very long. You're going to read it later, but essentially it's two parts. And the first part is him telling a story and getting caught up in a story, and then in the second part, it is him kind of asking for those around him to tell him stories. And so I think it's a good lens through which to view this idea that we do the same thing. We are living a story and we make sense of the world around us through story. And we also build relationships through the use of story. Think about some of your best friends. Think about your significant other, if you have one, or somebody you have dated before. You built your relationship with them through the process of sharing stories. This is how we build friendships. Those stories may be through text message. They may be lived stories, stories we told in the moment, in the presence of somebody else. But this is what we do, though, and we tell stories about who we are. We tell stories about who we hope to be. We tell stories about our past experiences. And here's the thing, nobody had to teach you how to tell a story, right? We grow up playing through the lens of story. Think about who you were as a kid. For those of you who are athletes or used to be athletes, you all envisioned this down by two kind of scenario, 5, 4, 3, and you put the shot up, it's the last inning and you go to bat. And so we've all played, the athletes, we've played that moment out. We've told ourselves the story and thrusted ourselves as the leader of the story. My daughters used to want to play house, and they'd always give me the little father figurine, and all of a sudden, something wrong would happen. The dog's loose, or the house is on fire. These are my little girls, right? They're 2, 3 years old at this time. I didn't teach them how to tell a story. My sons, they want to wrestle, and they talk about who is the strongest and which good guy is going to overcome the bad guy. That is a story. We play through the lens of story really naturally. And then the other stories that we engage with are more things that we use for entertainment or for escape. Think about how much time you spend on TikTok, on Instagram, on Reels, on YouTube, on Netflix, watching movies, playing video games. We spend our money on story. We dedicate our life to story. We are relaxed by story. All of these things are examples of stories. So we are literally natural born storytellers, and we are natural born story understanders. If you excuse my colloquialism there, we make sense of the world around us using story. It's not about whether or not you like movies or like stories. You live through that lens. We are literally a storytelling species. That is the essence of who we are. So when we talk about story, there's lots of different ways to approach and to think about story, but what constitutes a story, though? What has to happen for a story to exist? Well, it's three or four things really, but it's really, really simple. And what's really unique about this idea is that if somebody were to ask you what a story is, it might be a struggle for you to tell them in one sentence, right? You know what a story is, you recognize what it is, you know how to tell one, but when it comes to giving the definition of a story, I think a lot of people struggle there because There's so many different ways you could approach that definition. For the sake of this class and the reading of the poem and how we're going to explore story, we're going to define story as this. It's very, very simple. And every single story ever told follows the same structure. A story is about a person who wants something but has to overcome something to get it. That's the essence of a story. You have a person or a personified thing, as we've seen in Disney movies and animated films. Even a toaster, if it's being personified, if it has feelings, it can be a lead character. But a story is about a person that wants something. So think about the person over here, and this is what they want, and there's something in the between it. But they have to overcome something to get it. So if you're thinking about that traditional narrative arc that kind of goes up and then falls down, you can think of it like a mountain, right? And I have to overcome this thing here in order to get what I want, which is on the other side here, all right? So that's how we are describing story for the sake of this class at this time. And so when we think about story through that lens, then we begin to see that our lives are actually made up of hundreds of little stories. A story is anytime there's a character that wants something, okay, then there's a story there. Because what do I have to do to get what I want? Many times there's an obstacle, there's conflict, there's struggle, and that's where the story happens. Think about the last time you watched a Netflix series or some sort of series on Amazon, Hulu, Netflix, Paramount, wherever it is you watch television. Think about what was it that hooked you about a story? What was it that caused you to stay up 6 hours straight watching this television show? Was it because the shots were pretty? No, probably not. Was it because there was good music? Probably not. Were the characters just so wonderful? Maybe. It was the story that pulled us in. So what happens early on in any Netflix series, really, something happens that disrupts the status quo. You may have a doctor and everything is good, and then all of a sudden they get in a car wreck and they lose their memory. I don't remember what that's called, doc or something of that nature. You may have a bunch of teenagers and everything is fine. It's a beautiful day, and then all of a sudden one of them meets a vampire. That throws a wrench into things, right? And so something bad happens or something happened that creates conflict, which creates tension. And now I have to overcome something, and I have to work for it, and I have to cry and fight. And that's where the story happens. We want to know what's going to happen. There is research that shows that our brains, they cannot stand this phenomenon called cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance happens when it's an annoyance in our brain. It's when we don't know how something resolves. Okay? And there's another theory called the information gap theory. The information gap theory is the gap between what we know and what we want to know. Right? So there's a gap there that our brains get irritated by. So the reason that you enjoy stories so much, and the reason why you'll stay up far past your bedtime in order to watch the season finale after having watched for 8 hours, or the reason that you'll spend all night finishing a video game, being caught up in a story, wanting to know what happens, it's because your brain is irritated. There is dissonance, a cognitive dissonance happening, and your brain is pushing you to do whatever you can in order to close that gap between what you know and what you want to know. So your brain literally sort of encourages you to stay with the story, to engage with it long enough to see how it pays off. And so if you've ever wondered, how am I able to stick around on this story for so long? Well, it's because your brains are sort of hardwired to push you forward to do so. The paradox is, the strange thing is that even though our brains get irritated by the gap in information that a story presents to us. And how does a story do that? A story does that by showing us a character going through something, and we don't know how they get through it, right? We don't know. We want to know, how do they overcome this big thing? And it is that question that keeps us watching. What happens next? What happens next? How do they overcome? How do they become somebody different by the end? The reason that we love these stories so much is that we love stories so much, especially watching them, and that we're entertained by them, is because we are living a story. And because we, not only are we entertained by watching other people go through difficult things and persevere ultimately, or maybe not, is we're also learning how to become better humans ourselves. The name of this class, of course, is Humanities. Humanities is the story of what it means to be human. And we're looking at it through the lens of poetry, but poetry is just a human expression of what it means to be human, an expression of what it means to be human. And so we enjoy these stories so much, any story, television, movie, TikTok, because we can relate. We identify with the people that we are looking at. We identify with their stories. We may not have lived the same story, but the same emotion is something that we identify with and that we connect with. And that is really, really powerful, because what happens in these stories is we see there's a transformation at the end, right? And I think subconsciously we desire a transformation at the end. Whatever story you're going through right now, your hope is that by the end of it, you'll be a different person, a better person, wiser, wealthier maybe, smarter, stronger, whatever the story is you're living. And you're living many of them, right? Every class you're attending, that's a little mini story. You're a student, you want a good grade. What do you have to overcome to get a good grade, right? If you're going to the gym right now because you've noticed you've gotten a little bit out of shape, you are a person who wants to be physically, mentally in shape, and so you're going to the gym, and now you have to fight through, just time management and motivation and all those things and then your diet in order to see results from going to the gym. If you're dating somebody, you're a character who wants to be loved, and you're having to navigate all that murky space of distrust and loyalty and just confusion that comes with trying to get to know somebody else. You're living literally hundreds and hundreds of stories. And then you have a much larger story that you are living as well. But the hope for all of us, and the thing that keeps us coming back to stories, is we want to know what happens, and we want to see the transformation, because we want ourselves to experience the transformation. So how does this all work? When we're getting thrown into a story and we're being transported into a story, why does it feel like such a journey? Well, there's a theory called the narrative transportation theory. It was developed by two people named Green and Brock in the year 2000. And what Green and Brock, her name is Melanie Green, what she proposed was that when people enter into a story, they are literally transported. Okay, so envision just being transported into a different world. You literally leave this world and you're transported mentally, emotionally into the world of the story. And so there's a couple of really powerful things that happen during this transportation. First of all, you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. You ever been to a movie or been watching a television show, or any story that you're involved in, you're so into it that you don't even really notice what's happening around you. Maybe you're reading a book, for those of you that read. You feel like you exist in the world to the point that you feel sad about not having any interaction with the characters after the book is over or after the film is done. You are transported there. Do you think it's strange that sometimes stories on the film, on the screen, or in books make us cry? This is odd, right? Because we know this is fiction, that these stories aren't real. And yet our brains have a much more difficult time differentiating whether or not this is real. Our brains feel and send signals for us to show emotion, to get teary eyed, even at, an animated movie, right? We have shown emotion because we get so transported into the film that cognitively our brain has a difficult time differentiating the real world from the world that we are existing in. So there's 5 things that are happening when we get transported into a story. First one is we become co-participants of creating the story. All right. So every story begins with a setting, and the audience becomes a co-creator of that setting. Even in a film, when we see the setting clearly, once we see the setting, we imagine ourselves existing in the setting. Or if we're reading a book, we literally create the setting visually. Or we're listening to somebody speak, we create that setting visually as well. Every time we are entered into a story, we populate that world with our own thoughts, with our own characters. We make assumptions about the world based on what we see or what we are imagining, right? And this is usually a subconscious kind of cognitive mechanism. We don't really realize we're doing it. But when we are entering to a world, we assume to understand how that world operates, how it moves, that there's gravity, that other people exist in the world. We assume to know what the streets look like, even the streets we can't see. We assume to know what buildings look like, how people talk and feel. We make all these assumptions about the world based on unlimited information. So in that way, we actually do more of the work in creating that world than the storyteller themselves does. And so what this does is it makes us co-participants in creating the world, right? And so it doesn't really feel like somebody else's world. We make it feel like our world, right? And so we feel responsible for it because we helped create it in our minds. We are transported there more easily. It's like this idea that the best idea is one that you feel like you came up with yourself. Those are the most convincing ideas. The same phenomenon exists in this co-participating of creating a world. You become transported into it because it feels familiar, because you did a lot of the brain power cognitive work in order to create it. The second thing that happens that causes us to get deep into a story is conflict. A disruption happens, and now we want to know what's going to happen next. And I just spoke a minute ago about the information gap theory. This is when our brain recognizes a gap between what it knows and what it wants to know. It has to resolve it. Our brain feels necessary to resolve how does this conflict resolve in the end. This is curiosity. The curiosity bothers our brain. It literally feels like an itch until resolution. So we're transported into a world that we help create. Something happens in that world, and that triggers that cognitive dissonance, that information gap theory. And then we begin to see characters. We begin to identify with the characters because now we don't just want to know what happens next. Right? We want to feel what happens next. We care about these people in the movie, in the book, in the video game, because we identify with the character's struggle. We see ourselves in the character's struggle. We may not have ever gone through specifically what they go through, but the emotions they're feeling are universal. Emotions like fear, doubt, longing, joy, they bridge the gap between the idea that maybe we haven't gone through that specific thing and what we do understand. So while I may not have ever struggled with anxiety, or maybe I've never been a victim of assault, or maybe I've never lost somebody really close to me, I understand and connect with the emotions that derive out of that because I understand fear. I understand pain. I understand confusion. So when we enter into a story, even if it's a story about a jet fighter from 1980 and you've never even seen a jet, you identify with him or her or them because you understand confusion and fear and longing and desire and regret. So when we begin to identify with the characters, we get deeper and deeper into the story because, yeah, we do want to see what happens. We want to see how they transform, but just as strong, we care about these people. Now, they feel like real people to us. And in reality, what happens many times in this storytelling phenomenon here, when we're watching a film or reading a book, we're not even really looking, we see ourselves in the characters. That's what we get really interested in. We we become the characters almost. And so that feels really powerful to us. The fourth thing is what's called emotional absorption. This is when your body starts reacting to the things happening in the story, like your breath deepens, your eyes moisten, your heart rate rises, or maybe there's complete stillness. Maybe you sit unmoving for 30 minutes. So at this point, you're not just a spectator of the story. You are in the story. You feel like you are inside of it. And I think this is why stories cause us to reflect so deeply. Think about that phenomenon when you walk out of a movie and you feel a little bit disoriented and you are thinking about what you just witnessed and you're reflecting on what it means to you. That phenomenon is emotional absorption. You got so emotionally absorbed in the story that even after the story was over, it continued resonating with you afterwards. The fifth thing that's a really interesting phenomenon of story is that it actually causes reduced resistance. Okay? When people are deeply transported, you stop arguing with the world and you just exist in it. Okay? You don't analyze why things are the way they are or aren't a certain way. You just experience it. It becomes less about a sphere for you to argue and to disagree, and you're just in it. All right. So we see there's lots of research that shows stories can transport people so deeply that their beliefs and attitudes shift because the story caused them to bypass argument and instead triggers their empathy. We got so into the story world. We identified with the characters so deeply. We got so emotionally connected that we became the characters and we felt empathy, and now we're reflecting on that change in ourselves. And it could be temporary, but I think most of us have probably been shaped and reshaped by stories. A lot of your beliefs, a lot of your understanding of the way things are and should be are based on stories you heard, from somebody through film, through a speech, or through something. Your beliefs and attitudes were shaped by stories. And the reason that those stories were able to shape your beliefs and attitudes is because you connected deeply to the character and you felt some deep empathy for them, which helped transcend reduces argumentative traits in us. And so this transportation is an interesting phenomenon because it shows us that the idea of being shaped by a story isn't just a theoretical idea. There are actual journals and articles that show how powerful this is, right? And so this week we're going to be reading Robert Penn Warren's Tell Me a Story. It's a really beautiful poem about a boy and an experience that he had, and then it has two parts, like I mentioned earlier. The second part is sort of an invitation where he wants to experience that more often. And so as you're reading that poem this week, I want you to think about this lecture. I want you to think about what a story is, what it means to us, how we use it to make meaning of our own lives, of the lives of others, of this whole world. Good moments, bad moments, difficult moments. and I want you to try to derive some different meaning from the poem based upon the central idea of what makes a story so powerful for us as humans and why our lives seem to revolve around this idea of being storytellers. Appreciate you guys, and I'll see all of you later on. Have a good week. Bye-bye.